Half-Life 2 has an interesting philosophy when it comes to pacing that's quite a bit different than Half-Life 1. The original Half-Life's pacing was largely traditional. Some chapters were slow, some had more story, some had puzzles, some were upbeat and full of combat, and this is what we've come to expect from games. But Half-Life 2's pacing saw many chapters have very specific gimmicks that you didn't see in the rest of the game. You interacted with it once, and then it was gone. Now, Half-Life 1 did have chapters like this, say with residue processing or on a rail, but these are the exceptions, not the rule. And coincidentally, these chapters are generally the ones people don't like that much. So when I made a video like this ranking Half-Life 1's chapters, people weren't really upset. They either agreed with me or they could understand what I was saying. I do not expect that to be the case here. I fully expect this video to be somewhat controversial because people disagree with how good or bad these chapters are. So keep in mind, my ranking is entirely just what chapters I have the most fun with personally. I'm going to try to balance out what ones are the best for first-time playthroughs and repeat playthroughs, but I played Half-Life 2 a million times, so I'm going to favor repeat playthroughs a little more. Hey everyone, I'm JarekTheGamingDragon, and let's rank Half-Life 2's chapters from the worst to the best. In very last place, the chapter I look forward to less than any other chapter is Black Mesa East. Okay, so this chapter heavily suffers when you're trying to do repeat playthroughs. For a first-time playthrough, this chapter is perfectly fine. This chapter introduces Mossman and then properly introduces the fact that Alex and her do not get along. It gives you some downtime after a very long water hazard chapter, and it gives you the gravity gun. That said, this chapter is effectively just a cutscene and then a tutorial, so if you've played it before, it's very slow and you just want to get through it. If I had the ability to pause the game and then skip this chapter, I would every time. A Red Letter Day. This chapter basically has the same problems that Black Mesa East do. It's another cutscene chapter that you can't skip. For a first-time playthrough, this chapter is great. It does introduce everything you need to know, characters that you should become very familiar with. But once you have played the game, you kind of have no reason to play this chapter again. That said, this one doesn't suffer anywhere near as much as Black Mesa East because you can just start a new game at Root Canal and skip this entire chapter without missing anything. Nova Prospect. Alright, we're finally getting into chapters that have quote-unquote real gameplay. I've never really cared for Nova Prospect personally. A lot of very drab hallways and fighting almost nothing but Combine. While yes, I get it, you are effectively in a high security prison that is a death sentence, so it should look drab, it doesn't make it very interesting to look at in my opinion. It doesn't help that, like I said, the variety is basically you're fighting nothing but Combine. And no, having a defense section doesn't add more variety. I find these defense sections to be really boring personally. Entanglement. This is basically just more Nova Prospect. In fact, according to the game, this is chapter 9A, not even chapter 10. So while the game says there are 13 chapters, there are technically 14. Anyway, yeah, a lot of drab hallways and shooting at Combine, and oh boy, another defense section at the end. Follow Freeman. This chapter suffers from just poor placement in the game. It happens right after Anti-Citizen 1 and is effectively more Anti-Citizen 1. By the time you get to the end of that chapter, you're probably burned out on this type of gameplay. It's a lot of fighting Combine in the streets. It actually kind of sucks because the raid on this building, whether it's a state capitol or a museum or something, it's actually pretty damn good. Like the map layout of this building, the way everything works, is a lot of fun. But at that point, I feel that a lot of people are probably playing the game just to beat the game, and it does start to get repetitive. There is one new addition, however, it just doesn't happen to be a good one. And that's fighting the Striders. Striders look really cool, they sound awesome, that giant laser beam destroying parts of buildings near you is always really amusing, but fighting them is actually not great. In fact, it's more tedious than anything else. Why do they take so many rockets? And this fight at the end that's supposed to be the climax of this chapter, fuck this thing. I really do just find Striders more annoying than anything else. It just takes up too much time fighting them. Dark Energy, the final boss of the game. You finally confront Breen, and yeah, I don't really have any strong opinions about this chapter one way or another. It's fine. The way the story events play out is perfectly fine. The way the final boss works is perfectly fine. We kind of just throw energy balls back at Breen, and that's about it. Yeah, this could be a lot worse, and this could be a lot better. This does kind of suck because it ended up being a massive cliffhanger at the end of Half-Life 2. Like, this doesn't resolve anything. Is Alex going to die? Where are we going? What's happening? But nowadays that doesn't really matter because we at least have episode 1 and 2. If only we could say the same about episode 2. Anti-Citizen 1. This is full-out urban warfare in the city. At first, it's actually pretty awesome, but I do feel that this chapter tends to drag on a little too long, and then you get Follow Freeman right after. But regardless, this is still a really fun chapter for the most part. I do say for the most part because it does have that one section where you're having to defend Alex, and this is just not very fun. If you can't tell, I don't really care about defense sections much. You can have them be fun. I do think Valve learned how to make them fun. Say that one defense section in episode 2 in Vortal Coil, but this isn't one of them. Sand traps. This chapter is really hard to rank. The first half of it is effectively just a continuation of Highway 17. I mean, literally just more Highway 17. It's not till about halfway through the chapter that you finally get to its namesake. This is where you need to play the floor is lava, otherwise you're attacked by antlions. Enemies that I don't find very fun, nor do I find the floor is lava very fun. When I play this chapter these days, I just run across the sand because only so many antlions can spawn, so who cares? But after an okay boss battle, you finally get control of these antlions. And the first few times I played this game, it was massively satisfying to turn your enemies against your enemies. But after playing this game a million times, this is just one of those gimmick chapters. Yes, you can throw antlions out at your enemies and have them kill the Combine over and over again, but that's one option compared to a full gun roster, and I generally just want to shoot the enemies with guns and make things more interesting. It's badass and cool, but does kind of get boring. Point insertion. This is the first chapter of the game, the only one I've rated so highly that doesn't have any combat. Valve really knew what they were doing when it came to introducing you into a new environment. Keep in mind, Half-Life 1 took place in the Black Mesa research facility on the other side of the world, so this chapter needed to both introduce you to where you are location-wise and a new oppressive society where the Combine have everyone under control. It also immediately introduces Breen as someone very important. Atmosphere and storytelling is really thick in this chapter, without anyone needing to tell you anything. Valve have always been masters at doing this, and this chapter shows it. Our benefactors. The first time you beat Half-Life 2, this might be your favorite chapter. Being able to simply pick up any enemy and ragdoll them across the room with your gravity gun is really funny. It's meant to be a power trip. It's the end of the game, you're supposed to feel powerful. But much like sand traps, this kind of is a gimmick that, after you played the game a few times, loses its luster. It's still fun, but it's just there, and I think I would like to have more variety. Root Canal. This is the first chapter where you have any sort of combat. I know I've ranked this one really high, but I've always liked this chapter. You're pretty limited on your weapons, but this chapter isn't very long. And while yes, the pistol itself is kind of a bad gun compared to most others in Half-Life 2, you're only really facing Metro Cops, and they don't have a lot of health, so this pistol is a perfectly serviceable weapon within this chapter. I do find it very fun to fight Metro Cops with just the pistol. It's very polished and a bit scripted and very linear, but when done right, none of those things are bad. Water Hazard. This is the one that I fully expect to be very controversial because people seem to hate this chapter and I've never understood it. I like this chapter. People like Highway 17 for the same reasons that they don't like Water Hazard, which is very weird. Water Hazard gives you a vehicle and then gives you complete freedom to just explore where you are. It's very linear, but it doesn't really feel that way. I also don't really have any problem with the way the build controls. People complain about that a lot, but I find it fine and pretty fun, honestly. This chapter makes a natural and intuitive stop-and-go playstyle that I don't find annoying. You'll be driving your boat along and then see a barn off in the distance, so naturally you'll stop and want to explore this barn, just to find out that the Combine have shelled this barn. It was an outpost, it was a stop along the railroad, but now it is no more. And the first few times you play Half-Life 2, you may not even notice this. There's so much to see in this chapter. So yeah, this chapter is definitely overhated, and perhaps we should appreciate it more. Highway 17. Everything I said about Water Hazard applies to this chapter. Honestly, I personally like Water Hazard more than Highway 17, but I can't reasonably rank it higher. Highway 17 is Water Hazard, but bigger and with a different vehicle. It also has a bigger enemy and weapon roster, it has arguably a better location, and it has arguably the best set piece in the entire game. This bridge is very memorable, and I've always enjoyed this section. And of course, it has that masterclass Valve storytelling where you can stop anywhere you want and make sense of what happened here. Why is this house empty? What happened to the people that lived here? But at number 1, this is probably the most predictable out of everything. It's Ravenholm. Ravenholm may just be the best chapter in all of Half-Life, not just Half-Life 2. Valve somehow managed to make a tutorial chapter their masterpiece. Now, why am I calling it a tutorial chapter? Well, The first thing you see when you come into Ravenholm is this. So immediately Valve is laying atmosphere on you heavily. Suddenly, you're playing a horror game. But very quickly you go into this room. You were overloaded with things that you can pick up, and you were forced to pick up because your path is blocked. Putting half of a zombie on top of the saw blade makes it very obvious what happened to that saw blade. And you have the ability to do that because you just got the gravity gun.
Fucking knew it!
Lucix, you grabbed it.
Yeah, I grabbed it.
You scared yourself. Nowadays, this seems really obvious, but keep in mind, Half-Life 2 was revolutionary when it came to physics. You didn't have props everywhere in games before this that you could play with, so it wasn't really going to be on people's minds. This chapter was made with the ability to use only the gravity gun. That would be a lot more difficult if you were fighting enemies with weapons. Instead, you're just fighting zombies. How did they make this work? Well, they turned it into a horror chapter. I have not met a single person that doesn't praise Ravenholm, and there is a very good reason for that. Okay, well, I've met a few people that don't handle horror games very well, and they didn't like Ravenholm for that reason, but that's only more points to Ravenholm in my opinion.
What just happened? I missed it.
Oh. Why is it snarling at me?
You fucked up. Why'd you pause that?
What just happened?
I knew it! I knew it! I knew it! Oh my god, I knew it!
So there we go. That's how I ranked the 13/14 chapters of Half-Life 2. Big thanks to my YouTube members. They help support this channel and get to see my videos early. If you want to become a member, you can click on that right next to the subscribe button. If you want to support me in other ways, you can watch any of my videos. That always helps me. You can check a full playlist of videos that I've made or check what YouTube is recommending for you. Also, you can click the circle thing and that would subscribe to my channel. Thank all you guys for watching. I'll see you next time.